Hey, awesomes. Welcome back. Hope you had a great break. Um, so before we left, we were, well, still technically, I guess, since it's Sunday, finishing up our annotated bibliography assignments, as well as our source maps, everything that has been submitted for those, for the most part, source maps anyway. Everything should be updated and graded for you. I've started grading these already. I've got a handful of annotated bibliography assignments I've already graded. They're looking very, 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 very good. So congratulations. Keep up that awesome work there. And so now that we have the proposal done, all of our sources in our annotated bibliography, with those two artifacts, okay, those two assignments completed, as I've been touting, excuse me, this whole semester, that this now the research paper itself will be much easier to write. In other words, when we have our sources all done, we kind of know where we're headed. If we started off like a research question or going into a particular issue, now we can stop and say, okay, got all the information I need. Now I can kind of start to write my research paper. I've done the research, right? The research part of the paper. Now for the paper part of the paper, okay? All right, so I'm gonna kind of introduce Project 3, the APA paper. So what first thing I've done, I've taken the liberty of copying and pasting kind of the introduction / rationale part or section, if you will, of Project 3. I've added a few things. So if you haven't looked at Project 3, or if you look at Project 3 APA research paper, I added some more additional background information for you, especially in the introduction, just to kind of help us think a little bit about why I'm making you write a research paper, why writing a research paper in APA format more specifically is necessary, and kind of what it does. So we're going to talk about that over the next several weeks as we are writing these. But the main thing is that, and I know I don't want to make it sound like, excuse me, I know most of you understand for the most part, right, what a research paper is, right? When you do research about a topic, you're trying to find something or you're looking for a solution to something. And in most cases, we have perhaps discovered a problem or an issue. So we're going to write probably more the argumentative type. And some of us may feel like we still want to write an analytical paper. Maybe the research question that we're looking for maybe doesn't have something that's glaring as a solution, but perhaps there are, through your research, there's a different way of looking at it. So maybe you want to present that type of information. So it would be more of an analytical research paper. Perhaps you have found something very, very specific, right? There's a topic that's really, really super debatable, and you want to end up on a particular side of that based on what you've researched, right? As opposed to the analytical research paper kind of presents information and then at its conclusion, if you will, for an analytical paper says, okay, we need to kind of look at it this way, or here's my interpretation and evaluation of what's being said. So both, in a way, right, end with something, right? An argumentative paper is going to argue something very, very specific about that topic. And then analytical research paper is also going to, in a way, argue that a different interpretation needs to be perhaps considered, or more exploration perhaps is needed. But in that exploration, we need to be thinking about it from a different perspective, right? Through this evaluation. So I kind of do a recap here of the two types of research papers. And then, of course, here are the main, I say sections, really for the formatting aspect of it, right? It's more, here's everything that needs to be included. The title page, you have an abstract page, you'll have an introduction, which includes your literature review, which is what we're going to kind of take. And now we're going to take the annotated bibliography, and we're going to put those, we've done the map too, right? And so the map helped us begin to put those sources in conversation with one another, right? Where they converge and even where they diverged, right? So that is where we're going to use what we learned from there and take those minimum, at least our 7 sources. I know some of you had 8 or 9, which is totally fine. And now we're going to put them in conversation with each other very specifically. And we'll talk about what that looks like this over the next week or so. Then we have a methods section, which is basically saying, what did you do, right? If you did some primary research, did you do a survey? Did you do a questionnaire? Did you talk to some people? That kind of thing. And then also, what did you do for secondary research? Which you talk a lot about your annotated bibliography process, right? What you did, you mapped sources, right? That was one of your methods to help you think about this topic. And then your results are, okay, now that I've done all that research, here's what I discovered, right? Here's what was found. Then there's a discussion section, which means, okay, here, based on the results, what does it mean? Okay, we'll talk more about that. Then you'll have a conclusion, and then, of course, you'll have your references page. So I reiterate right here what I said, my lead off. Now that you've done the research proposal, now that you've done the annotated bibliography, mapping of the sources, and you have a really good, clear idea of what you're talking about, you're ready. You're ready to now start writing. And so some of the things we're going to do to help us with some of these different sections, especially the introduction, okay, and the literature review up here. These chapters from Grizz Writes, chapters 15 and 16, which we'll go over later on in the week as well. I encourage you, make sure you read those, especially chapter 15, because it talks about how we're going to synthesize this information. Okay, and synthesis helps us think about literature review, because in the annotated bibliography, we had, okay, here's this source, here's what it says, here's how it's going to help me, da-da-da-da-da. And some of you have already kind of started doing that, I noticed in several of the annotated bibliographies that I've read already, right? So, okay, this source is saying this, and it's kind of converging or diverging from this other source. So even as doing the sources map, already got us thinking about convergences and divergences. So if 2 sources are converging, or with 3 sources, 2 are converging, 1 is right there, but it kind of diverges a little bit, right? Now we're going to start, that's like the beginning of synthesis, okay? So as we synthesize all this information we have, got this source over here doing this thing, got this source here, it's converging and diverging from maybe this other source here. Think about your map, okay? So hope I didn't tell you, I hope you don't throw away your maps yet, okay? Use that, especially in your introduction, to think about how these are working in relation to each other, right? Whether they are converging or whether they are diverging from each other. Those are going to be very, very, very specific and key aspects of the literature review section of your introduction. And then, of course, you have your conclusion and, of course, your references page as well. Now, we'll look at the format template real quick, as well as the research paper assignment description, which I put up here. But first, let's look at, so I've got this is the same page here that I have referenced several times, and as you're probably sick and tired of hearing about the Purdue OWL, but it really is a good resource. So it talks about the research paper being it's this culmination of everything that you have literally researched, every single thing that you've typed in to try to find where your conversation is taking place, right? And that's at the heart of it. And now that you've done this research, now you're going to kind of think about, okay, is this going to be an argumentative thing where I have a specific thesis statement, right? I have an intention that I want my audience to really think about this particular stance. So I really kind of want to argue something, especially these are ones that are like debatable or controversial, which I know we kind of really trying to get there. I know there's several of you ended up with something that's more on the analytical standpoint from the analytical aspect, and that's totally fine too. So that will be a research question, right? Maybe there's no particular stance yet, but through exploration and evaluation, perhaps you're going to arrive at something more where maybe this isn't as debatable necessarily as controversial, at least in your mind. We still want to persuade the audience to look at things perhaps differently, and we'll talk a little bit more about those over the week too. And begin to think about that. It may be clear, right? If it's not so clear, obviously reach out and let me know. So the other big resource is under the readings is the format template. All right, and this is a Google Doc that hopefully you should be able to take. and use. And of course, we'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but I do want to share with you kind of the basics of it. So as you're looking at it, it's literally going to go through, okay, here is page, quote unquote, page one, right? Here's the title page. All right. You have your title, your name, your department, right? Wherever you are. If you're in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, then you put Writing and Rhetoric in there. If you're Department of School of Business or whatever, all right, Oakland University. And you have your abstract. And then with each one of these, I kind of give a synopsis of kind of what you want to try to do here, right? So here's what you want to kind of do for the abstract. Write your keywords in. And then this is where the body of your paper begins. This is technically the introduction, but do not label it as an introduction, okay? Just center your title of your paper, and then we just go, all right? And inside the introduction is also where where we start to synthesize sources. We talk about this is kind of a literature review is embedded, if you will, inside of the introduction. Now, you'll come across a lot of APA-style papers where they'll start right off. It's not necessarily, it's part of the introduction given the background, and they may have a subheading that says literature review. Some do that, some don't. That's up to you. And then this goes into kind of, I don't say detail. We give some background information about things that you might want to be thinking about when you're thinking about what kind of things to pull out from your sources to situate. All right. So purpose of a literature review in an introduction in an APA style paper is to really situate your research, present the conversation, right? Here's the conversation about this thing, about this topic that I am researching, right? It's right here, right? Here's what people are saying about it. And so we want to tease out the most important information, especially as it relates to where we know that we're headed. Okay. We'll talk more about that. All right. Then of course there's a methods section. All right. And notice that each one of these starts on its own page, right? So when you're done, right? So if you finish your methods section and you're halfway through that page, you enter till you get to the first line, okay, of the next page, results, and then you type in your results, right? And you address those things, right? And the same thing for discussion, same thing will be for conclusion, all right? And then the same thing will be for references, okay? And we'll go into, of course, obviously going into detail, but I wanted to give you some of that background information of how the APA format template works, why there's writing underneath each one of these sections to kind of give you an idea of what the goal, the aim, what we're looking for in this section to do. All right. So there's a lot of information kind of this week. I'm going to go into greater detail next week, the literature review as conversation as it's part of the introduction. Okay. So that it's talk a little bit more about synthesis. So make sure in your Grizz Rights you read chapters 15 and 16. I'll probably go into greater detail about those next week. But this week, I just kind of want to lay a good solid foundation. Talk a little bit about the title page. It's just a little different. It's not brain surgery. The abstract, not going to be brain surgery either. We'll start to talk this week about the introduction video, and then we'll segue into next week, really kind of getting into the meat and potatoes, kind of one of the more challenging aspects of the APA research paper. At least in the beginning, is the kind of getting this, writing the literature review section of the introduction or part of the introduction, at least as APA likes it done. So we'll get into those details even more next week, but we'll get us started here. But feel free to look at the APA template, obviously look over the assignment description and all the resources here and read those chapters. I'll probably be posting these videos throughout the week. All right. So you've got plenty to kind of get you started right now. Okay. But I'll be back later on in the week and we'll keep it moving forward. So keep working on your annotated bibliographies. If you haven't done your sources map and you still need to get that turned in, get that submitted. Still need to get your annotated bibliography, get that in before you start this. Okay. It's good to have all that. Good to have all those sources and them mapped ahead of time, and that will make what we've got come, especially the literature review section of the introduction that we talk about next week. It's good to have those things done. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Glad to be back. All right, the sooner we get back from winter break, the sooner the semester ends, right? I guess. Okay.